Evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ask Professor Paranormal. Fair warning, my camera is doing some glitchy things, which it also did the other day when I was doing a class on field investigations, but not my other classes, so maybe there's a ghost here screwing around with me. We'll see. But welcome, and if the like it just did, because it looked like it just went out, I might have to, actually, it's coming back again. It's flickering. I may have to switch cameras here because I do have another camera that I can switch into. Anyway, I'm sure that we can hear. I really want to see. So Patrick, and hello to everybody else. I definitely want to see Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I'm really excited about it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to see it next weekend because next weekend I'll be at the Oregon Ghost Conference. And those of you who know, Susanna is coming, who's with us tonight. For those of you who are there, who are going to be in that part of the world, Seaside, Oregon, it looks like it's going to be a cool convention, and I've got a bunch of things that I'm doing there. Anyway, I probably not going to see it till I come back from that. In fact, I know I'm not going to see it till I come back from that. So I'll be trying to avoid any spoilers before that, but it looks great. The movie looks great. Looks like a lot of fun. Seen several interviews with some of the folks, and looking really forward to it. Yes, Kat, I think it is Ghost in the Machine. I'm pretty sure there's somebody screwing around with me. And hi to everybody else. Hi, John. Glad you made it. That's good. And let's hope that the camera kind of sticks with it for right now. But in the meantime, the music, okay, so the music that was the intro, just to let you know, was done years ago by a friend of mine named Eric Brad. It was actually music for a video that I was doing, a lecture video called Exploring the Real Life X-Files Ghosts. Did that in 1999. It's actually on my other YouTube, is simply youtube.com/profparanormal. No ask in front of that. And you can find the video lecture there as well. Hi, Kathy. Thanks for coming. All right. And Sandra, welcome. Anybody have anything they want to start with? Otherwise, we can talk about some general stuff that I've got coming up, or some general questions that people might actually have as well. And it's looking pretty quiet right now to start. Last time we did this, it was one thing right after the other. So hopefully we can get some questions going here. In the meantime, my phone just started going off, which is weird. Okay, there's definitely something going on. Somebody's with me at this point, and it won't stop. Oh my gosh. Excuse me a second. There we go. Turn the volume off completely. All right, so I'm going to assume that there is someone here with me, or somebody doing something to me at this point. So let's start out talking. Just want to let you know what's coming up next month. So this session tonight is the 17th. Doing one also on the 31st of March, and then we're going to go to 2 weeks later, which will be the 14th of April. Of course, 2 weeks after that. I'll be doing 2 weeks all the way through till about, I think it's about the end of June, and then they're going to have to adjust things a little bit. In May, I'll be teaching a few courses for the Rhine Research Center, a few different courses. I'll be teaching a class on, yeah, thank you, Grog. I'll be teaching a class on human personality and the survival of bodily death. So basically on the evidence for life after death from the parapsychological perspective, as well as we'll kind of touch on some other cultural stuff too. And then I'm doing a cross-cultural course called Cross-Culturals or Cultural Studies and Parapsychology. And it's going to be really parapsychology and anthropology. A lot of folks have really enjoyed that class in the past. Those are both 8-week classes. And in mid-May, I'll be starting a 4-week class, which hopefully many of you will tell your friends about if you haven't, or maybe even consider, which is a class on psychic development called Developing Your Intuition, actually really developing your ESP more than anything else. So on that note, let's see, we have anything here, and people are pretty quiet. So let's I can talk about a couple of things right off the bat, one of which is kind of my favorite topic or least favorite topic, depending how you look at it, to talk about. And that is how much crazy information, videos, photos, EVPs are out there on the internet, on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram. It's like I'm seeing it pretty much everywhere now. It's like every week there are probably several articles on the Coast to Coast AM newsletter. So for those of you that don't know Coast to Coast AM, that is one of the longest running paranormal, unexplained focused radio programs, which is also broadcast on the web. It is originally Art Bell was the host on that. George Noory currently hosts it. Others have hosted it in between. And they put out a newsletter, which you can sign up for, even if you don't, not a paid subscriber of their other stuff. But they always feature or seem to feature either videos or photos of UFOs. There have been a couple of Bigfoot photos and videos. There have been certainly tons of apparent ghost photos or videos, and most of which are, people after the fact have been reviewing video or reviewing something, a photograph, and they see something. I always have to wonder, however, when I see somebody posting something like their security camera on their house looking outside, nothing specific went off in the house, no alarms, no indications, no motion sensors or anything like that. But suddenly they're looking through apparently 8 hours worth of video to find some weird shape moving through. And all of a sudden that's a ghost. So when we, in my field, in parapsychology, in any related field, anybody actually looking at video, anybody looking at photography these days, especially, you got to wonder why the sudden leap to something paranormal. And I think that's just the influence of pop culture. I'm really hoping that Ghostbusters, the new Ghostbusters film, has a major impact on people, because the last time it had a major impact on people questioned everything afterwards, what people were claiming. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not talking about people's experiences. I'm talking about the equipment and things like that, photos and stuff. And basically, while a picture can be considered evidence of something, any picture can be considered evidence of something. But the question is, what's it evidence of? And unless you have some indication that this is something related to a ghost or a haunting or something like that, it's an unidentified something. That's assuming that somebody didn't screw around with it or play around with it. So it's a real problem for us when people send me video and photos. And I get so many videos, a lot less today than I used to, which is fortunate. But every once in a while, I get people ask me, what do you think of this? Is this a ghost? It's like, I can't tell you if it's a ghost. It's unusual, perhaps. All I can do is kind of eliminate the normal possibilities that are off the top of my head, and I'm not a professional videographer. All right, I see a question here from Susanna. Another dimension. I realize that another dimension that does not have special spatial properties, but it seems it would be very, very crowded. Is there a whole lot more dead people than live? There are a whole lot more dead people than live, reincarnation considered. So, that's a really interesting question. The afterlife, whatever that is, may be another, you may be right. It's probably not another spatial dimension. In other words, it's not like away from Earth. But physicists have mathematically described more than 4 dimensions, the 4 dimensions we're aware of consciously, us normal people are aware of, the 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time, duration. So it is possible, according to physics, that there are other dimensions that we're not, our perceptions, and the perceptions of any creature on the earth may not be aware of. In other words, we may be sitting here in the same space, more or less, as something else as well, and that something else may or may not be able to interact with us at all. There's a lot of questions about that. There are different questions about, the multiverse and about parallel universes, and a lot of that is all speculation at this point, or science fiction, because while it can be theoretically described and even mathematically to some extent, physicists have talked about anywhere from 11 to 27 dimensions, or even more than that. It's not the idea that we can necessarily connect with that, and maybe consciousness is the common thing. Maybe that is what allows us to communicate, which would make sense, given that mediums talk to people on the other side of whatever that is. I always thought that the other side is a different thing, is a really odd thing to say. It's like saying there's a wall between us, and it's not, they're on the other side of a wall. And if it's something in the physics of everything that makes sense, I think it's interesting when people talk about piercing the veil. talking about the day after Halloween as being, All Souls Day basically being the time when the veil is the thinnest. And that would almost translate as a metaphor to the thinness of possible communication or contact, because the dimensions or something else is going on there. It's really hard to describe any of this stuff outside of fiction because we really don't know. And if we're trying to describe something that's not physical the way we think of it as being physical, it's really hard to do that without the concepts to start with. All right, thank you very much, Greg, for that statement there. Yes, string theory has multiple dimensions as necessary to unite quantum physics and classical physics. And of course, string theory itself is still a theory, and there are physicists who don't agree with it at all. There are other approaches to what the universe is like. And it's, one of the things we hear from the pseudo-skeptics is parapsychology is not a science because it doesn't have a coherent theory. Neither does physics for a lot of things. Certainly psychology doesn't have a coherent theory. So when we talk about these ideas, string theory approaches the universe one way, quantum physics another way. There are different ways of looking at the universe and how it works. Right now there's even, I was just reading a science article the other day about how there's some question about our complete understanding of the universe, given that it's very clear, thanks to the James Webb Telescope and other calculations, that different parts of the universe are moving rapidly away from other parts at different rates. So the expansion of the universe is not consistent. And that challenges a lot of ideas about physics of the universe. So that's changing a fundamental question. We don't know what dark energy is. We don't know what dark matter is. It has not been identified. It's been given placeholder names, dark energy, dark matter, based on mathematical calculations. But even the calculation of the expanding universe, which led to the idea of dark energy and dark matter, and the 2012, was in 2010 Nobel Prize, I think it was, for Saul Perlmutter and a few other folks who were looking at the expansion rate of the universe. Now that this new finding comes in, this may be challenging that as well, or at least causing it to be manipulated, kind of altered it a little bit. So it's very, very weird. Skipping over to Mariah, I believe we're existing simultaneously, but in different stages of awareness. That may very well be, because consciousness is the thing. What do you think of the Premonitions Bureau, the Albert So the Premonitions Bureau, the Central Premonitions Bureau, was something run by an individual. I think you're right, John Barker. I think it was that he was with the New York Times. He actually worked with the New York Times, and he had his own premonition bureau, which the Central Premonitions Bureau was advertised all over the place. People would send him things, letters and their predictions, and then he would try to follow up as we didn't have the internet back then, but he would follow up through the News Bureau, since he had access to information that the average person would not, to confirm whether or not something happened. The Aberfan coal slip disaster was a huge pile of coal that fell on a school. That was not only predicted by people sending information into the Central Premonitions Registry, but also by a lot of folks locally who reported it otherwise. So I think that idea is a really great concept, time stamping, especially, or getting a letter and then following up, or nowadays you can follow up. I'm hoping that AI is going to help us do that kind of thing. This would be a really good time coming up to, and it looks like my camera's fading in and out, so I apologize for that, folks. I know you can all still hear me, but it should come right back up here in a moment. I think that it'll be really interesting to see how we can apply AI to various things. So I'm actually going to pause here, and I think I'm going to switch cameras. Let's see if I do have another camera. So give me a moment, everybody. And hopefully you can hear me. So hang on a second. Let's see if I can actually get my other camera up out here, and I'm going to switch this out. So just give me one moment. And hopefully this will work. Okay, there we go. Hopefully this camera will be working fine. All right, let me go back to, looks like it's on and not turning off, which is good. I'm seeing, of course, I'm seeing a delay at this point. There we go. I think we're good. All right, so let's go back here now to the questions. Lauren, referred by someone who admired me deeply. That's very nice. Friend has 5-year-old twins, boy and a girl. Daughter has been saying things that lead me to believe she remembers her past life. Interesting. Okay. Dig a little deeper, find out some detail around her past life. Don't know how to handle the conversation. All right. Well, first, if your friend is wondering about this, the thing to do is to have your friend, just jot down whatever the girl has said, and just start with that, and maybe have her ask the little girl. She's talking about a past life. She's talking about her previous parents, her other house, her other parents, things like that, to write that down, and even ask questions like, do you know your name? Do you know where you live? Just that may or may not come through. The best person to talk to about this is Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia's Medical School in the Division of Perceptual Studies. And I think I can quickly see if I can quickly get the link, and I can put it in the chat. So let me just get that. Yeah, here we go. So let me get the link for you, and I'll put this in the chat. Contact them, or you can contact me, and I can get you direct email to him, to Jim Tucker, and put you in contact directly. And let's see here. Let's put this in the chat. There we go. So again, it's Dr. Jim Tucker. He is the leading expert on these kinds of cases. And he'll be able to really give you some good advice. He may have one of his research assistants work with you or with your friend on this particular case, but they're always looking for new cases on this. And the cases are not publicized or anything like that. So he would be a really good person to connect with. But again, if you wanted to just contact me, you can just send me an email to this email address, and I'll give you Jim's direct email address. Okay. Greg, lately have more conversations with friends about court. Also helped a friend understand the poltergeist phenomenon. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, Greg. The cases of the reincarnation type, those are the court cases, for those of you that don't know that abbreviation. They're really interesting, especially with little kids who remember previous lives. And there's so much really good material on record. Most of it's in books, some in journal articles, but there's some really good cases out there that have been solved and really shown that the individual could not, the child and the family could not have known the information about that previous life. So in actuality, this kind of case is one of the more interesting for a lot of folks, even skeptics of apparitions and hauntings and things like that, because they have a big question mark to them. Even Carl Sagan, who absolutely did not believe in most of parapsychological work, he still wondered. In one of his books, the book was called The Demon Haunted World, had nothing to do with actual demons. Sagan was a science guy. There were three things, I can't remember what the third was, but there were three things in parapsychology that he had really, I remember this, real interest in, and stated in this book should be followed up on even by people who don't believe in it. And that is, the main one was children who remember previous lives, because there's not really any other model in science that would explain it at all. The second was remote viewing and the quality of the remote viewers and not only the government project, just in general. And the third, I believe, was the Gonsfeld work. So that's very particular type of ESP work that was there. So that sort of stuff, when it takes a major skeptic to actually look at that and say, hey, we don't have any sort of explanation for this, for the better of the cases. Now, naturally, for adults that remember previous lives, you never know if it's stuff that's stuck in their unconscious. It's information they might have already gotten in their lifetime. With little kids, it's not the case. So it's a really interesting phenomenon. Cat, people predicted he would die. Yeah, Barker, yeah, that's right. He did die suddenly and the Bureau came to an end. There was another one. Somebody did try to start one up on the web, and I don't know if it's still there. But there was an attempt for a central premonitions registry a few years ago, about 10 years ago. And yeah, I don't think it exists anymore. Let's see here. I'm actually checking something here. Oh, yeah, no, there is another one, but yeah, I kind of doubt this really exists anymore. It's a P.O. box. Probably not so much. It's probably from encyclopedia.com. Probably not what we're talking about. Yeah, I think that database technology now would be useful. And again, the AI stuff that's out there, even if you had enough data to work with and you fed that into a chat GPT, even the ones that hallucinate, if it's only limited to a particular data set, those kinds of generative AI processes work much better. And looking for common factors. What you really want, though, is the AI or the assessment, the analysis to actually identify what the potential event might be, some approximate timing, and then consistently go out and look for news events or news about events that might match the premonitions. The problem is so many predictions or premonitions don't have a timestamp. In other words, when they come in, there's a timestamp. But what they refer to, like how far in the future this is going to happen, is a problem. So, for example, and I mentioned this last time, I think it was, that I was a member of an e-group called the Intuition Network a number of years ago, which Jeffrey Mishlev had started, if I recall correctly. And it had a number of psychics, remote viewers, and other people, and parapsychologists there. And somebody in June of 2001 posted that he had a very strong, he believed, a precognitive dream of an aircraft hitting the World Trade Center. No idea when, but he saw the building going down. Only one, though. He didn't see both. So without knowing when that was going to happen, that was obviously a prediction. But if you're trying to use that information to prevent something or to assess, it's really tough to say. Then the other question, of course, the skeptics would say, well, how many other people have had dreams of a plane hitting the World Trade Center for years before the actual 9/11 event? And it's a reasonable question, but there's also something about psychic dreams which people identify as different and specific. Okay, Mew, you started your research from Stevenson's research, yeah. Ian Stevenson was a really interesting person. His interest in reincarnation, or at least these kinds of cases cross-culturally, was an important piece of our field. He started really around 1960. Most of the work that he published for many years was reincarnation cases involved in places like Thailand, Burma, Lebanon, Turkey, Sri Lanka. I'm just looking at my books here. India, places that had a belief, where people had a belief in it. It took a while for U.S. cases to come out. And that's partly because Western culture, especially our culture, a parent has an experience with that. Depending on their religious background, they might immediately think the kid is possessed or just imagining things. It might be not enough to convince the parent to even to even think about having any research done. Changing a little bit today, of course. Let's see. And I would agree that his way of researching is investigative, which is what impressed Carl Sagan. It was Stevenson's work, and Stevenson worked with other folks, including Erlander Haraldson. Jim Matlock's another one who has done that kind of work and still around doing it. But absolutely an important thing, in fact, for our field and just generally for spontaneous cases in general, for investigating anything paranormal. There's a lot of lessons to be learned by the way that Stevenson's folks actually have done the work over the years with the reincarnation cases. Let's see. Tina, wasn't that the PK Man? No, the PK Man I don't think he had anything to do with that prediction I'm talking about for the internet, the Intuition Network. That particular one. I don't recall him. He wasn't, I don't think he was even on, Ted Owens was not on that, in that group, I believe. I don't believe, I mean, Jeff Mitchell was certainly, he wrote the book about Owens, but no, it wouldn't have been that, wouldn't have been him. The group, Intuition Group, someone dreamed of an airplane, yeah. Time stamping is the problem. This is the same problem that happened with David Booth, a computer salesman back in the late 1970s, 1978, who was having a recurring dream about a jumbo jet coming into O'Hare after dark and it crashing, killing everybody aboard. His dream included the fault in the avionics, the problem in the aircraft. Did not include when, what date, in other words. It did not include even the month. It did not include the airline or the aircraft number or even the flight number. But he did, because of his recurrent dream, he actually called the FAA. And years later, it was in the mid 80s, mid to late 80s, that I got a chance through a friend of mine at NBC News to talk to someone at the FAA who actually had spoken to Booth. He was the guy who took the call. And they were, because of after checking him out, they were impressed at his knowledge of the fault inside the aircraft and his description of what was going on, because he would have to have had mechanical knowledge of the avionics, the workup, how the aircraft actually worked. He did not, clearly. So the problem was that they could not ground every jumbo jet. Without an airline, preferably flight number, but without a date and airline, hundreds of these flights coming in and out of O'Hare all the time, they couldn't do anything about it. And it actually happened as he predicted. And it was the same problem. And the bigger problem was, the reason they didn't ground everybody, unlike what's happened recently with Boeing, is that they didn't have an example of this happening, which is what happened with Boeing recently. But the fault that he described, which actually was the problem with the aircraft as the NTSB found, was so deeply inside the avionics, they would have to take the plane out of order for at least 24 hours. And with as many aircraft as there were of that type, again, without knowing the airline, they couldn't even send out warnings because there was no way for maintenance to do a simple check. So things like that do happen. And this is the problem with precognition. We have to have that check, or at least a warning sign that tells you something's about to happen to you at some point. Jaded Cicada. When I was a child, maybe 5 or 6, I had fallen asleep on the couch, woke up in the middle of the night to about 5 shadow figures holding hands and dancing in a circle. They were short, maybe 3 feet tall. Are these specific entities? Not necessarily. As we wake up, we're in a hypnagogic state. And hypnagogic, hypnopompic state, that state between sleep and wakefulness, imagery from our dream, from our unconscious, that actually comes through as well. Now, we are often a little bit more psychic, but typically that comes out in the form of out-of-body experiences, not in perceptions in the room. So we tend to look at that as more from your unconscious, again, dream residue, that kind of thing, as anything psychic. Hi, Paul. Let's see. Are you aware of any psychic who predicted COVID? There have been many psychics who have predicted that we would be hit with some kind of pandemic over the years, but nothing specific enough about COVID. And honestly, you could pretty much have predicted this back in the middle of the 20th century. It's pretty easy to say that that's going to happen at some point. Now, if you can predict it's something like there are going to be lockdowns and all that sort of thing, that's a little bit more specific. But I know that there were even predictions in the National Enquirer by some well-known psychics of the time, the 80s and 90s, who predicted stuff like that. And I know from talking to one of them who actually did predictions for the Enquirer every year, who was a very good psychic in New York. She really wasn't being psychic. She said, they just want, they pay me for predictions, and we know that they're not going to come true, but they want big stuff that'll catch headlines. So she just kind of threw stuff out there quite a bit. All right, let's see. So I don't know of any. I will say that someone told me that Sylvia Browne predicted the COVID, and actually the prediction is about the same generic thing that so many other psychics did. Considering that Sylvia's predictions otherwise never came true, it's unlikely, and she really didn't from my perspective, wasn't doing anything psychic, that it's unlikely that she really predicted the pandemic in that way. Or just had any foreknowledge of it. All right. Let's see. Hi, Danya, and welcome, Ben, as well. Today is St. Gertrude's Day. All right, so I know it's St. Patrick's Day. I don't know who St. Gertrude is at all. So maybe you can enlighten us all in the chat here. Let's see. The book Messages is about signs, visits, and premonitions from loved ones lost on 9/11. Interesting. Okay. To take a look at that. St. G is the patron saint of cats. What do you think is the best way for cat lovers to celebrate this special day? Okay, run outside. I'll tell you what we do. Not because of St. Gertrude's Day. So we have a way of bribing our cats. And it turned out a friend of ours who's a vet tech, they also use the same thing. There's this stuff, which is like a puree that you can buy. They're cat treats. Their purees come in little tubes. And the brand that we have found is Churu, Churu. And our cat, we call it kitty crack, because our cats will come running as soon as we open a tube, pretty much. And we've given some a little bit to them every day, and also as a treat. You got to find the right flavors, but it's better than anything else we've ever seen. And we've talked to other cat owners, and same thing. I'm sure there's doggy versions of that. Of course, dogs will eat a lot more different things than cats will, for that matter. Yeah, so extra treats. That's it. Thank you, Cat. Cat put it in the right thing. Yeah. Yeah, and our cats could take it or leave it when it comes to catnip. I've had cats. The original cat I had, which was a kitten I found, actually, so I kind of adopted her back in the 80s. She would have nothing to do with catnip at all, but she would come running if I had anything with vanilla in it from anywhere in the house. If I was having vanilla ice cream or anything with vanilla in it, she could smell it and come running. And the other thing she liked to eat was baby's breath for some unknown reason. So catnip's not great for every cat. If you could be a writer in the new Ghostbuster movie, what would you have them do? Oh boy, if there was another Ghostbuster movie, I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that, Mariah. Maybe alien ghosts would be kind of cool. Something outside of human supernatural folklore. Something way beyond that would be kind of bizarre and cool to do. Yeah, baby's breath is in the flowery stuff that you often have with roses. Very, very weird for the cat to eat that. Okay. I'm really, for those of you who are following the Ghostbusters movie stuff, it does really look good, and it's getting a lot of really good play. We'll see what, I'm really happy they're back in New York, because that's kind of the home base for Ghostbusters in general. And I just like the old and the new generations kind of mixing up, and how many of the old generation are actually going to be there. So it was good to see Slimer as well in the trailers. I think they should do something along the lines of being in an actual haunted house way up in the city in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, something to have to draw them. Yeah. Um, thanks, Kat. Yeah, it'd be kind of interesting to have Ghostbusters go to like one of the haunted places and get locked in and have to solve some kind of mystery to get out. Kind of like Scooby Doo in that way. All right. And by the way, I buy the Churu stuff on Amazon, or you can get it at Walmart typically. I don't find it usually at the main pet stores, like Petco and PetSmart. Back to the cat stuff. All right. So let me think what else we can talk about here. Um, so right now I'm teaching 3 classes, one of which is on field investigations, another is on technology, paranormal technology, and the third actually is on dreams and altered states of consciousness, which is going back to that question about waking up and seeing some figures and such. There's a lot of mysterious things about sleep. And one of the things, again, we're back to why is there no central theory for parapsychology? Well, it's because there may be more than one thing involved, and human psychology is involved. In fact, I can mention something that was mentioned last time, that one of the folks technically within the field of parapsychology, Chris French, he's a professor over in the UK, who has been in and around parapsychology a long time, but incredibly skeptical and disbelieving about the phenomena. He did admit not too long ago in one statement that parapsychology is doing scientific work. However, he's also recently made a statement that parapsychology has no replicable or repeatable experiments, unlike psychology, where many experiments are 100% repeatable. And I would love to see those 100% repeatable experiments, because unless you're doing the same thing with the same person over and over again and giving them time to rest in between, there is no such thing as a repeatable experiment at 100% in psychology. It's even hard to find that in physics, or in chemistry. You can find that, but it doesn't take much to make it not 100% repeatable. So for someone who is critical of parapsychology to say that psychology can do it, but you can't, considering the fact that we have a higher replication rate in general than most psychology experiments, I'd say that's pretty indicative of a person's belief and bias more than anything else. All right, so back to here. Your dad died on your birthday. Can someone do that on purpose? It's certainly possible. As Kat is mentioning, it is a kind of an ancient thing that to say, not only choose your death day. Certainly Mark Twain did it. Sam Clemens, he predicted his death long before he died, because he was born when Halley's Comet came, and he said he was going to die when Halley's Comet came back, and sure enough, he did. People often, our relatives often, hang on. If you are across country and you find out that your grandfather or father or mother is in the hospital dying and they want to see you, they may hang on until you get there. And shortly after they see you, say goodbye to everybody, that's when they expire. So we do have apparently some influence on that, on how we deal with things as well. John, ever consider that alien ghosts and or spirits are the same thing as human spirits? Well, another planet, different physical being. There are people who say that we get reincarnated in different planets. That's where some of the channeling stuff has come in as well. We have no good evidence of that, because if a person claims to remember a life on an alien planet, how do we do anything with that? We haven't even shown life on other planets. We assume there is life on other planets. It'd be stupid to think there's not. It was stupid to think that there's not intelligent life in other parts of the universe. But that would indicate if our soul or spirit or whatever we are, our consciousness gets reborn elsewhere, that would have to be a real shift in universal physics too, because of distance and all that. But then again, there are people who claim that we can be reincarnated multiple times in different times at the same time. So kind of interesting in that way. Graveyard grog. I'll die the day pigs fly. Okay. I, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that could be instant immortality. You know, somebody might make a pig that could fly at some point. So, you mean you have to specify fly under their own power is important here, very important here, because pigs do fly on aircraft sometimes, and I assume that if you launched a pig with a catapult, not that anybody should do that, it'd be flying at that point. All right. Yeah, personally, my death day is far far away, but I want to make sure I stop aging to it before that happens. All right. So a couple things I should, I was just talking about the skeptical thing. It's always a good idea for you, if you are faced with people in your life who don't believe in what you're interested in. When we talk about the paranormal, you ask them what they know about it, and then ask them if they know something about it, where'd they get that information from? Because if they're certainly getting it from television or from horror movies, I think you could pretty much argue against that being appropriate understanding of where the science actually is. Ghost hunters and folks from here and there, they're not even aware that there's over 140 years of history of doing these investigations. Well over that. That's actually only going back as far as the Society for Psychical Research, which started in 1882. There was a London Ghost Club before that with people doing investigations even before that. And there are prior ghost investigations going back at least the 17th century, actually even further back. There is one a couple thousand years ago. Termodorus, an ancient Greek, did a ghost investigation and solved it. So our interest in psychic phenomena cross-culturally goes back thousands of years. There's evidence going back thousands of years in ancient literature as well. When I hear ghost hunters saying that it's a recent thing or that there is nothing old, or I even heard one of the guys on TV say that at a conference, nothing before the 1990s, it's just an absurd statement of ignorance. Maybe sincere ignorance, but usually pretty easy to address. The other thing I just want to pass along to everybody before I go to Mariah's comment here, and that is the statement I often get hit with or question is, where's your proof of ghosts? Well, first, in science, proof is a very difficult thing, just in general, but putting that aside, I know what people mean when they say proof. I want to know where proof of consciousness is. And that's how I respond. Where's your proof that consciousness exists as a thing outside the brain, inside the brain? We have assumptions. There are materialist neuroscientists who and others who believe that their opinion is that we are like meat robots. We are programmed. Our activities and actions, the decisions to different stimuli, it's programmed into us. We're like, again, meat robots, basically. We don't even really have free will. And the opposite end of that spectrum is that consciousness is more than brain. And there are different ideas about that. And if we consider that spirit or ghosts or apparitions are consciousness without a body, we first need to define consciousness in a way that people agree on. And we have not found that agreement, because all sciences seem to have, even within their sciences, including in neuroscience, there's a lot of different ideas about what causes consciousness, whether it's just the brain, whether it's more than brain, and so on. So until somebody can prove what consciousness is, I'm not worried about proving the existence of ghosts. And honestly, what that does is just what I just said, all that confuses the person, so they stop asking. So that gets rid of skeptics pretty easy. Mariah, your mom 100% chose the day and time when she passed in between her birthday and your birthday. Made sure you weren't there. Okay, yeah, I know people have done that. A lot of folks have talked about that, and even when we look at the experiences of deathbed visions, deathbed apparitions, where people who are in terminal situations in hospice or other places, and this goes back a long way, because there was even a book over 100 years ago on this subject, where a person who is in coma, who is sedated, has got Alzheimer's, suddenly gets hyper lucid or becomes awake, able to carry on conversations with people around them, or it's people who are already awake and just waiting. They see someone there, sometimes many someones, deceased members of their family. They might see deceased friends, other people who are there to help them go to the next step. And after a conversation like that, and hospice workers the world over have witnessed these kinds of conversations, some have reported seeing the apparitions themselves. The person goes back into that state and then passes away, because then they're ready. They're told it's time. So people are choosing in different ways. All right. Graveyard Grog, I don't think there's proof. There are theories and data to support the possibility of existence. That's what it is in science. You know, when we talk about proof, I think most people are really looking at what we deal with from almost from a legal perspective. What's proof in a courtroom? What is proof? Proof of concept. What is proof to you individually? Well, to some people, proof that ghosts exist is an experience they had with an apparition. Proof that psychic phenomena is real, it might be psychic experience. That's proof to them. That's not scientific proof. That is subjective proof. Science looks at evidence and a preponderance of evidence, and we have that in the field. It's just that most people who are biased against our field won't even look at that, and they're pretty freely admit that they won't even bother to look at it. Okay, let's see here. I don't think that, let's see, Susanna, skeptics can be annoying. I was chatting with a couple of neighbors today. I shared that you're coming to a ghost conference, and one of the neighbors just laughed. Yeah, good for him. You know, it just at that point, it's just, and I've had the pleasure, if I'm somebody saying, you're involved in all that woo-woo stuff. And my response to that is, I'm involved in parapsychology, and if you don't know what that is, because clearly you don't, because you're calling it woo-woo, that's your problem, not mine. So, you know, Susanna, maybe he laughed because he had a fun experience with the ghost and was just reminding him of it. Or maybe he's a fan of the TV show Ghosts. All right, anybody else? We have about 10 or 11 minutes left here. More and more, we are seeing some psychologists and psychiatrists actually opening up to ideas of survival of bodily death, even if it's just working with people who have those beliefs and those experiences. I believe the American Psychiatric Association at their next convention, or at a convention coming up, is going to be having a panel on discussing bereavement and experiences of survival, which is important as well. And it's good. We want to see that. People in my field, we want to see that more and more. We want to see, especially psychiatrists, opening up to not immediately assuming that person has something wrong with them. That's a real problem. Psychologists too, you know, misdiagnosing because of a personal bias against an experience. And the thing that gets me the most is that I've talked to people over the years who went to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, had a real negative experience, decided not to go back to them. And when they explain what happened to them, it turns out, after a bit of questioning, that they misunderstood a normal experience. Their perceptions of an event were incorrect. There was nothing psychologically wrong with them. There was nothing paranormally right with them or wrong with them. They had a misperception, which, being diagnosed with a psychological problem because of that is to me, it's highly unethical, but that's where these fields often are. So we have to be real careful about that, because people make mistakes. Let's see here. I also believe there are positive skeptics and negative skeptics. That's true. A true skeptic, somebody who questions and offers questions and maybe never decides yay or nay whether they believe in something, they can be incredibly helpful, because they can ask questions you wouldn't have thought of. That's absolutely the case. Even somebody who's a little bit more on the negative side, but they got to still be open to reviewing the data, to looking at the situation, and offering those kinds of questions to look at. So that's really important. Yes, the show Ghosts. I love that show. I love the British show. I'm just started the last season. I bought the last season 4 and 5 on Amazon Prime Video because it wasn't being broadcast here in the States. Great show as well. Do you know about the Penrose and Hameroff? Yes. So Roger Penrose, legendary in mathematics, of course, and philosophy as well. And he's written a lot of stuff about physics over the years. I've read a whole bunch of his stuff, very dense stuff. But he and Stuart Hameroff, Hameroff is a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon who has been looking at consciousness, and they have real interesting theory and model of consciousness and how it's produced, but actually don't limit it to just the brain. And folks might want to look their theory up. It's pretty interesting. How would you situate Botkin's work in the greater field? So the after-death communication stuff using EMDR, if I recall correctly, which is kind of a tapping methodology, is really interesting. You know, it reminded me in some respects, by initiating an after-death communication with a loved one, it reminds me of the work that has been done also with the psychomantium, which is a tradition, an ancient Greek tradition that Raymond Moody brought back out in his book Reunions. It's a darkened space, pitch black. You might have a little candle or artificial candle there with a mirror, not reflecting you, but kind of reflecting the darkness, and people in a relaxed state trying to communicate with a family member will often see and sometimes hear that family member. And there have been studies on using a psychomantium in grief relief, and it's been very, very positive from a clinical perspective. I'd say that Botkin's work in a similar way, you know, from an evidential manner, not as good, because we don't get from Botkin's work, you don't always get the kind of specific information that could be verified that you couldn't have known. That's irrelevant. From the perspective of psychology and psychiatry, that technique to initiate after-death communication, whether that's a real communication or not, is an incredible positive benefit to people who are in grief. The same with the psychomantium, and the same with many mediumship encounters, working with a really good medium who knows something about grief as well. That's one of the things we insist the Forever Family Foundation mediums who are certified actually know something about. So all of those techniques are techniques that help the individual and maybe consider maybe brief therapy in some respect. Just like with past life regression, hypnotic regression, or past life therapy, which hypnotherapists and psychologists may do, there's not really good evidence for an actual past life or reincarnation for a lot of reasons. But as a therapeutic tool, it can work very, very well as brief therapy. So I think these techniques that border on the fringe, what they would say are fringe, or even woo-woo for some of these folks, are positive directions for folks. And, you know, there can be practitioners of Botkin's work or the psychomantium or past life regression who are total disbelievers that it's evidence of anything paranormal, psychic, or otherwise. But they recognize it's a tool that helps the people. I actually remember there was an article in the Skeptical Inquirer, of all things, where a skeptic who actually worked with Joe Nickell, his last name was Baker. I think it was Robert Baker. I have the article somewhere. He talked actually about, and he was very much a disbeliever in ghosts, but he talked about the fact that as a practitioner, a psychological, psychotherapist, he was a psychologist, he did not dismiss people's experiences. And there was one circumstance that he talked about where one of his clients came in and said that I think she was being, or he was being harassed by a ghost of a mother, I think it was a mother-in-law. And the mother-in-law wouldn't leave him alone, and had died and the whole bit. And Baker said, is she here now? And the person looks over in the corner and says, yes. So Baker gets up and goes to where the client actually looked and starts yelling at the ghost that's not there. He doesn't believe in ghosts. He starts yelling at the ghost and basically telling the ghost to stop bothering and go on, and then works back with the client. The client was shocked, and he then said, is she gone? And the client said, yes. He said, she won't come back. So Baker was assuming this is a psychological something or other. And then he worked through what the mother-in-law might have represented as a negative, which also would have been the case if it was a real ghost. Why was the mother-in-law bothering you? Why do you think the mother-in-law was bothering you? But there are people who are willing to at least work within the belief system of the individual, even if they don't personally believe those things are real. Mostly we find that with psychologists who are transpersonal psychologists or transpersonal therapists. There are psychiatrists who are very interested in the subject, but they tend to be people who have other esoteric or kind of niche interests, like Montague Ullman, who was one of the researchers with Stan Krippner of dream telepathy, but he had a real interest in dreams and not the standard psychological set. And he actually used some psychic protection techniques from psychics that he had talked to in helping determine that some of the people at a psychiatric institute he was working in were actually not schizophrenic. They had been misdiagnosed. They were actually potentially psychically open, and he taught them a technique that actually got them out of the hospital, out of that institution, off drugs and all that. So there needs to be more openness to non-traditional activities and approaches in dealing with patients, with clients. Whether or not you believe in this stuff, the individual believes in it. And it's not always an indication of insanity or something psychologically wrong with somebody. Danya, I've read that if you're involved in the lawsuit of divorce or child custody suit, you'd never admit having any sort of psychic experience or communication with spirits. It can be used by your opponent, certainly, in a negative way, but there are ways that you can actually, unless that's getting in the way of being a parent or is the source of the divorce, the problem is whatever is the source, it could be that you're too involved in sports as an observer, a sports fan, that can be a source of divorce. So I'd say that that's just as bad as having a psychic experience. In the field of communication with law enforcement, they're told to tell a subject that they believe what they're saying, but not enter into it with them, because that can drag them down a rabbit hole. That's true. That is true. That's one of the things J. Allen Hynek used to say about people who had UFO experiences that didn't have any physical elements to them. In fact, there was one that actually had physical elements to it. And the sincere belief that something has happened to you may be a misinterpretation, but that should not be challenged as a sincere belief. And that's something that, fortunately, some pseudo-skeptics, some people who are disbelievers in psi, have come to terms with and understand. Kenny Biddle, who I teach the skeptical approach to parapsychology with, is generally, he has exceptions where he lapses, I will say. But generally, he has told me that he's gone to some skeptics conferences and really feels creepy and very terrible when a parapsychologist's name is mentioned or something, or experiments mentioned, and the group starts saying woo 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 and starts laughing like little kids, like that neighbor of yours, Susanna. So it's it's a shame, but they've got their own problems. I'll put it that way. All right, we're just a minute past the hour. I'm sorry about the video issues earlier. Hopefully, it looks like I have to order another camera. But in any event, I think we're just about out for tonight, unless anybody has something. Tina, opposing attorney used my trifold beater against you, even though I use it for interior work, and said it doesn't indicate the presence of ghosts as per the manufacturer. Well, it doesn't. A trifold meter does not indicate the presence of ghosts. It indicates possibly unusual things happening in the environment. And unless you have made that statement, of course, you can make that kiddingly. It's a whole different thing and get in trouble for that. That is not the case. It is using environmental sensors is an appropriate scientific thing to do. Using them appropriately. Claiming that any of the ghost hunting gizmos detect ghosts is naive. But, from our perspective, there's nothing that can detect ghosts other than people and maybe some animals at this point. We don't have any idea what consciousness is made out of, or what it absolutely affects. And there are certain correlations that happen with magnetic fields, but they tend not to be apparitional. They tend to be more the place memory haunting, residual haunting thing. And even those are not 100%. So all that. Sorry that it was used against you. So next time, make sure that anybody has any problems or getting into legal trouble around anything you're doing ghost hunting, you might want to talk to some folks in the field and find the best arguments you can use. And I actually have a little bit of experience with law firms, so happy to help with that. All right, we'll see you in 2 weeks on the 31st. Anybody who's in Oregon this coming weekend, please stop by and ask Professor Paranormal a question in person. And hopefully, if you are coming to Oregon to Seaside, I'm actually performing Friday night as well as Professor Paranormal doing mentalism. All right. Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.